Very few franchises can boast the same kind of legacy that Halo has garnered. It's been a record breaker, a trendsetter, it's been labelled as the definitive game of its console, and the reason for selling Xboxes. It was once the game to beat for every other company attempting to make a first-person shooter, eventually having the term Halo Killer coined for any new franchise hoping to have a shot against this titan, but very few ever rose to the same level and none ever killed Halo. It's a franchise award-winning novelists want to write for, and somehow manages to rope in names like Neil Blomkamp, Steven Spielberg, and Ridley Scott for directing opportunities. Halo is a titan, even to this day. And okay, cards on the table, I love Halo. Not just, oh, Halo is my favourite video game. No, Halo has some of my favourite stories in all of fiction, some of my favourite characters, settings, locations, items, lore, and, as weird as it is to say with literary behemoths like Dickens, Tolstoy, and Tolkien existing, Halo has some of my favourite books of all time. So I gotta admit, I'm a bit biased. I love Halo. It's my favourite franchise. I consume product like it's popcorn. And it's because I love it so much that I'm making this series. I get to talk about what I like so much, and I get to criticise and take deeper looks at these games. Though I don't fully believe anything I've said here won't have been said by something else. Hell, as I'm typing this, I just realised how close the opening was to Nakey Jakey's videos on Halo. Which you should watch, by the way. It's 10 minutes and very good. But I, for one, am really excited about Infinite, and I want to share with you my experiences and opinions on the series. So with that, let's go back to the beginning, the very beginning, before Free for Free, before the spin-offs, before we remembered Reach, finished the fight, or even gave the Covenant back their bomb. Let's go back to when a little studio in Chicago was working on a little project called Monkey Nuts. Okay, sure, Bungie. Before Halo, Bungie had some experience with first-person shooters before, creating Pathways into Darkness and the Marathon trilogy, games that were clearly inspired by Doom, albeit Marathon was one of the first FPSs that had verticality to it. Later, Bungie left behind the FPS genre and began making real-time strategy games like Myth and Myth 2, all of these games being exclusives to the PC and Mac market. After Myth 2, Bungie began working on a spiritual successor to their previous franchise, a clone of Myth as they put it, but in a sci-fi skin. The project was briefly known as Armor, and then, like I said earlier, Monkey Nuts. Apparently, because Marathon and Myth released with their working titles, Bungie didn't want to release something with a boring title like Armor, and changed it to Monkey Nuts, knowing there'd be no chance they'd release something with that kind of name, making them eventually put in some effort and time into thinking what the game should be called. Although the name would be changed again when Jason Jones, co-founder of Bungie, couldn't bring himself to tell his mother that he was working on something called Monkey Nuts, so the project found itself another working title: Blam. This is all real, I swear, this book says so. There were two known major factions, a human military that was very clearly based on modern technology with vehicles such as jeeps and helicopters, and a fairly generic alien faction. Although, two other factions may have supposedly been in the game. Designs for tanks for a second alien faction existed, and the team were working on a faction that had just been labelled as fungal zombies. One thing does stick out from the old footage and screenshots of Blam, and that's the skybox. Even back then, you can see the world you stand on curving upwards into the sky and coming back round. It seems that the idea of a ring world was present even in the Blam days. But it seems Bungie weren't content with the RTS format, pushing for more action and realizing that what they wanted couldn't be accomplished in the slow, methodical RTS game. They began pushing the camera closer to the character, eventually deciding to take the game in a third-person shooter direction. Designers began working on a character that was meant to have a catchy, badass name, currently being nicknamed the Super Soldier, and soon the call was made to make the transition from third-person to first-person, completely changing the game from what it was. At this point, Blam was looking a lot more like the Halo we know today. Some of the elements from the RTS remained. One of those ideas was that if you kill the leader in the squad of grunts, the squad will panic and separate. That still exists in the game to this day, and a lot of vehicles were updated with the slight art style shifts. The Hummer became a Warthog, the Ghost gained its iconic look, everything was essentially improved and refined for the new camera angle and gameplay. The human faction started to look a bit more sci-fi while keeping its modern military roots, now being known as the UNSC. The primary alien faction became far more unique and noticeably more colourful, now being known as the Covenant. The second alien faction still made it into the main game. Although they and their tanks are never seen, their work is all around. These of course are now known as the Forerunners. And lastly, the fungal zombies gained a chilling backstory and a place in the world, no longer just being a potential Covenant bioweapon, but a horrific threat to the entire galaxy: the Flood. A demo was shown for the game at Macworld, a demo Bungie made in a week, a demo Steve Jobs himself showed up to point how cool it is. And that's when the world heard the name of the game for the first time: Halo. Only problem was, for a game of this scope, Bungie was gonna need funds that they just didn't have. And who would come out of the woodwork to scoop up the unsuspecting devs? Praise MS! As you probably already know, or easily guessed, Microsoft was planning to step into the console market and needed launch games to help them compete with Nintendo and Sony. And after seeing the demo for Halo, they knew that they'd have something great on their hands if they could get Bungie to agree to work with them. And Bungie, sorely needing the money to make something like Halo, agreed. Microsoft gave them a new office in Seattle, dev kits for their console for Bungie to work with and translate the controls from keyboard to the unholy girthy mass that was the Duke controller. This was their challenge, to essentially create a whole new way to play an FPS on a console. And what was their response to this challenge? They made B30, a massive island complete with enemy AIs and drivable vehicles, a wide open area for people to just run, drive and shoot with no objectives, just game mechanics exploration. Microsoft came in to test these levels and they loved it. Work progressed, it was about a year to release and Bungie was cutting what they didn't need and refining what they had. Wildlife on the Ring world was cut, but the enemy factions were refined, the story solidified, the multiplayer began to take form and was apparently almost cut days before release because it wasn't working. Imagine that, the first Halo game without a multiplayer. It would have been a very different world we live in today. The problems were fixed, the testing LAN parties were had, and the game was finished. 15th of November, Halo releases. And it's a hit, imagine that. Bungie's hard work paid off. The reviews are staggeringly positive, and the Xbox became a success, in large part due to the success of Halo. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anyone listening in the current year, but the point is, Halo made it big. Everyone loved it. It's the forefather of shooters on consoles, and one of the main reasons the game was so warmly received was its campaign. Man, I'm good at segues.
Cortana, all I need to know is, did we lose them?
I think we both know the answer to that.
And what a way to open, showing the mysterious Halo before us and panning up to reveal the Pillar of Autumn. This opening sets up what's to follow pretty well. The humans are on the run, talking about a powerful foe that has followed them all the way from Reach. We get to see the extent of the human military and see that, despite it being the far future, the world seems pretty familiar. The Marines are scrambling, sergeants delivering speeches about how badly they're gonna kick the butts of these squid lips. And then, we see him, the big boy himself, the Master Chief. And immediately you get what he's about. He's the big green space marine that all other humans talk about in reverence, their best chance at fighting the foe. And then... it just all goes to hell. The ship is blowing up around you. You catch glimpses of blue aliens just cutting down your allies as you run past. There's just blood everywhere, okay? You're thrown into all this with no weapons, and these boys, the Covenant, they're out to kill you. Always just out of reach, but you begin to see it's more than just the blue tall ones. There's little yellow and red ones. Just slightly one step behind as blast doors close to create as safe a passage as possible for you to reach the captain. It's such a great introduction to the Covenant. You get a sense of how dire things are. You saw all that humanity had to offer, and almost immediately it's being cut down by these aliens. Marines are wounded, men are dead. You understand the threat these aliens pose. So after making your way through all that hell, we get a proper introduction to all our main characters. The captain of the Pillar of Autumn, Jacob Keyes, the shipboard and rather snarky and playful AI, Cortana, and of course the stoic Master Chief. The direness of the situation is set up and we get some interesting world building. Despite however long this conflict between humanity and the Covenant has been going on, it seems the aliens have no idea about Earth, and Keyes is keen to keep it that way, instructing the Chief to take Cortana and get her and all the information she carries off the Autumn. And although the banter we get between the Chief and Cortana is brief, it perfectly sets up their characters and their relationship. They've been on a few adventures already, and despite how distant Chief might seem, they do act like friends. Like I said, great introduction to two characters whose relationship will carry us through almost every install. We'll get to that one. Anyway, you get Cortana. Key says he's going to try and land the Pillar of Autumn on that big ring thing in front of you, which we'll get to in a moment as well. All you need is a weapon.
Don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
Why? So after quickly finding ammunition, you're made familiar with the two main species of the Covenant you'll be encountering. Grunts. They're cowardly little gremlins that scream, cry, and quip as you kick their sorry little alien asses. And elites. Far bigger and far more competent shielded aliens that seem so much more ferocious and deadly than their grunt counterparts. The game does pretty well introducing you to combat also. You're given a basic shooting gallery with Covenant troops on the far end, and you are made well acquainted with your assault rifle and magnum, your best friends for this game. And the gunplay feels great. You'll quickly pick up that while bullets quickly take down grunts, it takes a while to break through elites' shields. However, you see that the Covenant drop their weapons whenever you kill them. Weapons you can pick up, and these plasma weapons work far better on the shielded enemies, setting up the basic duality of weapons that all Halo games will be based on. Human weapons for armor, Covenant weapons for shields. And as you go along, you find a single red elite with its back turned fighting Marines. And it's here the game teaches you two things. One, the difficulty of certain Covenant enemies can be clearly determined by color. You'll notice when you start pumping plasma or lead into this elite major that it'll take a lot more to put him down. And two, if you decide to be sneaky, you can crawl up behind certain foes and instantly kill them with a melee to the back. And you'll be able to apply all these tricks the game has been subtly teaching you in the next encounter. You're provided with two paths. You can choose to join your friendly Marines and face Covenant head on, or sneak around for a surprise attack and, hopefully, assassinate any unlucky elites, causing the lower ranking grunts to flee, which, like I said, is a little trick left over from Halo's RTS days and works wonders for giving the Covenant personality. Elites are big, scary, and in charge. The grunts are far weaker, far lower down the pecking order, and are complete babies. As well as learning combat tricks and techniques, the game also sets up little pieces of lore about the Covenant. They send a squad of high-ranking elites to the cryo chamber just to deal with you. Clearly, they're afraid of the Chief, and Cortana comments that the Covenant really doesn't want the humans on Halo. This is a great setup mission. It sets up the tones, the characters, the enemy, and where the story is going to go from here. As for the combat, it feels super fluid and fun. The few weapons you get your hands on all feel unique and serve specific purposes. The Covenant feel great to shoot at as well as be shot by. Each grenade clearly has its own role in the battlefield. And all this from a new control scheme that Bungie themselves had to invent to make their FPS on the console. It's a control scheme so good, so well designed, that every other FPS on consoles base their control scheme off this. Bungie really hit gold with this. It feels fantastic to play with. And something new for first-person shooters at the time, the player is limited to only 2 weapons, meaning you have to choose what to carry with you and what to leave behind, which was quite a departure from most other shooters on the market, which would let you carry pretty much any gun you found in an infinite backpack. Not with Halo. You have to think about what you're carrying. What would you rather? A precision weapon combined with a plasma weapon, or a power weapon combined with a standard assault rifle? It's all down to you. As I said, the first mission is great for setting up everything you're going to be carrying on through this game. Even as the game sets up new elements for you, it always comes back to the formulas set up in the Pillar of Autumn. Even going past Halo CE, mechanics and even story elements in Halo 5 you can trace all the way back to here. Just barely with the story though. So the mission finishes and Chief saves the last Marines aboard the Pillar of Autumn, and the survivors fly towards the mysterious object before them, leading into the second mission, Halo. And the first thing you're treated to is a new kind of environment and that magical skybox. Honestly, I remember the first time seeing the sky just blowing my mind. The idea of the world just curving up into the sky is just awe-inspiring and so iconic to the franchise. It's these skyboxes that definitely made the worlds Bungie created a treat to explore, and I'd even argue it carried over to Destiny. And especially for its time, the environment you're greeted with as you first step out onto Halo is really something. The mixture of natural structures and silver metals makes for an interesting and distinctly Halo setting. This level is also pretty integral to the future of Halo on that account, being the first we get to see of Forerunner architecture, introducing dropships for both humanity and the Covenant, and bringing vehicles into the weapons sandbox, opening with an initial encounter of 2 Banshees, and then, after defending a Forerunner pylon with a squad of Marines, the Chief receives his very first Warthog of the series. It's a very basic mission. All you have to do is defend 4 positions and the Marine squad's trapped there, but the way that this mission is laid out is what really makes it. After getting the Warthog and passing through the Forerunner cavern, you can choose to approach whichever Marine squad you prefer first. This openness is something that I'd argue is only really explored to this extent in Combat Evolved. The level design complements the sandbox really well, and while it's not exactly a full-on open world, the fact that you can approach these combat situations however you like in whatever order you like is one of the main strengths of CE. As for the vehicles themselves, they are exceptionally fun to use, especially the human vehicles like the Warthog, which offer multiple seats, one for a driver, one for a passenger, and one for a gunner. It's these kind of vehicles and this kind of mission that really sets up just how important the Marines are. You really bond with them, you feel how important they are. If you want to go on a Warthog drive, you're going to need someone in the back shooting. And all the while, they're quipping and saying how much they're going to beat up the Covenant and how much they just love being around you. It really personifies the UNSC. It makes you want to protect them. It makes you want to fight for humanity so that Private Jenkins over here doesn't get slaughtered. Oh no. Now that the basics of the game have been set up, the next few levels build upon the mechanics you've learned by offering new ways to explore them. You're given weapons like the sniper rifle, the rocket launcher, shotgun and needler, and given vehicles like the Ghost, Scorpion and Banshee. You're introduced to new level aesthetics like the inside of a Covenant battlecruiser, the Truth and Reconciliation, which is by the way a fantastic mission. Sneaking through Covenant forces with your sniper rifle and clearing Covenant forces away to get onto the ship and then exploring that ship, it feels fantastic. Here you have to rescue Keyes, and once you do, he reveals that the Covenant believes that Halo is some kind of super weapon of religious significance. After this, you'll be taking the fight all over Halo for supremacy of the structure, fighting the Covenant back and challenging them for control of the weapon, both of you vying for ownership of such a powerful tool. This takes up the first half of the campaign and it's a ton of fun. Each encounter with the Covenant feels unique and interesting as new types of aliens are introduced, such as the Golden Elite Zealots, wielding powerful energy swords, the cunning and cowardly Jackals hiding behind their shields, and the lumbering Hunters, big, powerful, tank-like infantry members of the Covenant with terrifying arm-mounted cannons. You will become very familiar with the sandbox and your enemies. A big highlight moment for me and the community at large is storming the beach on Silent Cartographer. This mission is what that B-30 demo became. You fight alongside squads of Marines pushing up the beach, overwhelming every Covenant defense you find with your vehicles and teammates, facing down these Hunters and enigmatic Golden Elite Zealots. The Silent Cartographer feels like the perfect showcase of what the first half of the campaign has to offer. And then comes the second half of the campaign. Master Chief fights his way through the Covenant and gets to Halo's control center. He's inserted Cortana into the terminal as she begins to decipher what exactly Halo is, only to tell you that something is wrong, and you need to stop Keyes from whatever it is he's doing before it's too late. Chief runs off to do just that, where the whole game suddenly becomes a nightmare realm. The next level starts with a cutscene of the Covenant fleeing from some unseen force through a dark, murky forest as foreboding music drones in the background. You step off your ship to see Keyes' own dropship in the distance, abandoned with ammo and weapons scattered on the floor. In the distance, an explosion rings out. The Covenant themselves don't seem to have fared much better as they have their own crashed dropship not too far. Even the positioning of their forces seems sporadic and random. There's no elites, just random squads of jackals and grunts. Your radar begins to pick up movement just out of your reach, and you see shapes move through the swamp. If it wasn't clear already, the tone of this level feels very different. Something is clearly off. Moving past empty turret encampments, you see gunfire in the distance. Something is shooting at fleeing Covenant squads with marine weapons. Naturally, you might assume this is where Keyes and his marines are, but as soon as you turn into the bunker the gunfire came from, it's empty. Nothing is there. Everything is deathly quiet. Because you've left Cortana behind, there's no voice ringing in your ear delivering you exposition. There's no bombastic music. There's no jump scare cues or whatever the hell. For a good portion of this mission, there's just silence. And it's used to supreme effect. A single empty elevator comes up to greet you. Taking it down brings you to vast rooms with scattered Covenant squads throughout the facility. And that's when the really bloodied bodies of Covenant soldiers you definitely didn't kill start turning up. You pass rooms with makeshift barricades, filled with the bodies of fallen grunts and jackals, and green ooze drips from the ceiling. And then you see...
Stay back! Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things!
Yeah, that's quite the change from every Marine encounter you've had before. Even when facing down the Covenant, the Marines always had this bravado in the face of impossible odds, and its complete admiration for the Chief. But now, seeing one screaming about monsters and shooting you out of paranoid fear feels like whiplash. In a good way, though. Don't know how good whiplash is possible, but... Anyway, you carry on. Covenant bodies are everywhere. Blown open doors with big red warning signs on them, the quiet ambience shifting to dark droning, finding human bodies now among the hallways. The build-up for what's to come has been excellent. That's when we get this cutscene. Probably one of the most famous cutscenes from Halo Combat Evolved. Chief finds the body of Private Jenkins and views the last things he saw. everything seems normal and familiar at first. The Marines you've met along the way are still full of courage and bravado and are ready to fight. They find the same facility you do, completely empty. And then there's the body of the elite, that they definitely didn't kill, with wounds that don't match plasma or bullets. Keyes and the Marines come to a room that the Covenant did their best to keep locked up, and of course, they break in. And I'm just gonna let this next bit play out.
Got a bad feeling about this.
Boy, you always got a bad feeling about something. What's going on, soldier?
He's got contact. Lots of them. But they're not Covenant. They're just tearing through us. What's the cloud? No!
Corporal, do you copy? Over. Mendoza, get your ass back up to second squad's position and find out what the hell is going on.
But
I don't have time for your lip, soldier. I gave you an
Sarge!
order.
Listen!
What is that? Where's that coming from, Mendoza?
I don't... There! Mira! Hold still! Hold still!
Let him have it. Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many,
Don't
Sarge!
even think about it, Marine.
What is it, Rocco?
Get back here, Marine! That's an order! Jenkins!
That was what killed the Marines. That was what had the Covenant running scared. That was what Cortana was warning you about. That is what's now standing in Chief's way. For the very first time, we're introduced to the third faction of Halo, the Flood. And what an introduction, let's be honest. With that build-up, yeah, of course it's going to make the evil popcorn frightening. And with the amount of them pouring from every angle makes for a very different fight. And then come the combat forms. This is the true terror of the Flood. You've got no clue what the little squiddy boys are. You have no idea why the bodies of former Marines and elites are reanimating with massive tentacles and are attacking you. All you know is that this is very bad and you have to get out of there. And that music shift. Those violins, they've just become a part of the Flood's image. It's so good. There is a neat little trick with the Flood though. If you shoot their arms off, they won't be able to attack you. And hey, you've got a little pet to follow you throughout the mission and creep you out with its broken neck and rotted flesh. Oh, and don't get comfortable after you've shot one to death. I did that too. And some of them start getting back up. Thank you, Bungie, for the screams. The Flood are super athletic. Super resilient. They're just awful, awful creatures. You can stumble into rooms of them just slaying poor Covenant forces like it's nothing. Fortunately, after rooms of Flood, you're provided with a shotgun that can cut them apart like butter, but it does little to thin the crowd of infection forms, so picking the right weapons for the job is a skill that needs to be relearned here. The player knows the best weapons for slaying Covenant. The Flood is another matter entirely. And now the player is introduced to Flood combat forms, carrying the weapons of fallen Covenant and Marine forces. And being shot at by a Marine weapon does feel pretty different to being shot at by Covenant weapons. There's so many rooms of Flood to cut through until you get back to where you came from and find a squad of Marines asking for your help. Chief will have to do his best to keep them alive until extraction comes. It's a mad dash to the tower as Flood begin pouring from every corner of the forest. It's when you reach the tower you notice friendly signatures and see these things. Sentinels, essentially the only remaining fighting force of the fourth faction, the Forerunners. With their help, clearing up the Flood becomes a lot easier. It's then you hear humming and are introduced to 343 Guilty Spark, the AI monitor of Installation 04, the Halo you stand upon. He whisks you away from the Marines in the forest, briefly telling you that the Flood has been released and the only way to stop them is to fire Halo. Honestly, this mission is a complete roller coaster and sets up the Flood in such a fantastic way. Being separated from Cortana definitely makes for a quieter experience, the lack of music for most of the first half of the mission adding to that. And when the Flood do come crawling from every crevice to come kill you, it's the stuff of nightmares. I think the game does such a great job at selling the terror of the Flood that it really doesn't matter that they don't look as detailed as they do in other Halo games. They still look like horrific mutants, and the way the Covenant and remaining human forces treat them really sells the faction as something to fear. And then comes the The library is another one of those levels like the Silent Cartographer that has earned a reputation in the Halo community, but for a very different reason. The entire mission is pretty much a climb up a flight of stairs and repeating hallways as the Flood just keep coming from every angle. Meanwhile, your only guide, Guilty Spark, will often get sidetracked and just leave you to your fate until returning a few moments later, after you've faced the horror of Flood-wielding rocket launchers to guide you back to the Index, a device that can be used to activate the Halo. It's an incredibly repetitive mission, and it definitely doesn't introduce enough new things for me to think that it can redeem itself. It's still a Halo mission, so the shooting is still fun, but this mission really doesn't derive much more for you than just a shooting gallery of Flood. Although I will confess, fighting alongside Sentinels properly and facing down the new Flood carrier form do make for some fun, but brief moments. And repetition really is the word of the day here, because despite the fantastic reveal of the Flood, the library is the last truly original level of the game, as the next levels are repeats of previous levels, allowing the player to revisit old environments, sometimes with little differences such as new enemy placements and the addition of the Flood, or big differences such as new parts to an old level with distinctly Flood-like aesthetics or destroying the old areas entirely. Speaking of returning to old areas though, after you retrieve the Index, 343 Guilty Spark brings you back to the control room and asks you to turn on the Halo so you can kill the Flood. Chief tries to do that only for Cortana to steal the Index and actually explain what Guilty Spark won't. Halo is a weapon, yes, but not one that any faction in the galaxy can risk to fire. Halo doesn't just target specific planets or species, it kills everything. A long time ago, the Forerunners, the creators of Halo, the Sentinels, and 343 Guilty Spark, fought a losing war against the Flood and in their desperation created a weapon that could wipe out the Flood's food in order to starve it out. So yeah, not a fate humanity would want, not a fate one would assume the Covenant even knows about. And although Chief and Cortana definitely agree killing everything in the galaxy is a bad idea, Guilty Spark doesn't seem to think so, and talks about the last time you fired the Halo array and wait, what? Okay, no time to think about that, I guess. Now we're fighting the Covenant, the Flood, and the Forerunners. But that second big twist works pretty well and further sets up the stakes. This isn't just a battle for a big hula hoop gun anymore between you and the Covenant. This is no longer a battle for survival against Uzi boys. This is a battle for the sake of every living thing. It's just you and Cortana against the might of the Covenant fleet, the Forerunner remnant, and the ever-increasing numbers of the Flood. Things are at their most dire. Though as you shoot your way out, mixing things up a little, and run down the road you took during the first control room mission, Cortana has an idea. If she can detonate the Pillar of Autumn, it'll likely have the power to destroy the Halo and take the Flood and any remaining Covenant out with it. But to do that, she'll have to find Captain Keyes and use the microchip implanted in his brain, which is a thing most humans have at this point, I guess, and use that to take control of the ship. The only problem is, he's back on the Truth and Reconciliation. Again. So off you go, back to the Covenant ship you boarded in the third mission. And despite the quiet, stealthy atmosphere of that level, this return feels noticeably more hectic. Pools glowing green play host to battles between Covenant and Flood forces. This ship is now definitely in a bad way as the Flood are slowly taking it for their own. And if the Flood somehow manage to fly that thing, they can go anywhere to spread their infection. And the Covenant clearly recognize this as a threat, as they start sending Black Spec Ops units to try and combat the infection aboard the Truth and Reconciliation. After cutting your way through both armies, you come across Captain Keyes, only to find out you're too late. He's become a part of the Flood. The visual is horrifying, even in these graphics from 2001. It's particularly grim and macabre as a screaming human face protrudes from bulbous, writhing sacks of flesh and bone. A face you once knew and had been fighting alongside for a good chunk of the game. As rough as that may be, you still need that chip. So with a heavy heart, Master Chief just puts his fist through his friend's face, from one end of the skull to another, dude, and just rips out that microchip. It's what he would have wanted. And now with the microchip in hand, it's back to the Pillar of Autumn to destroy that ship and hopefully the Halo with it. And here you'll face down everything the Covenant, the Flood, and Guilty Spark can throw at you, excluding vehicles. Re-exploring a now destroyed Pillar of Autumn with these much harder foes does feel like a fitting end, and out of all these recycled levels, this in particular is my favourite. Chief manages to get Cortana to the bridge, the same bridge at the start of the game where you met Keyes at, now dishevelled and ruined. Cortana starts the countdown to the Pillar of Autumn's detonation, only for Guilty Spark to halt it, leaving Chief with only one choice, to shoot the engine vents until he makes them explode himself. After that fun little segment and a few well-placed grenades, the Pillar of Autumn is on its way to self-destruction, despite any attempts Guilty Spark may try and take to stop it. Now comes one of the shining moments of Combat Evolved. the Warthog Run. You have to drive from one end of the ship to another, awaiting pickup from the same dropship that's been helping you throughout the entire game. It's an incredibly fun drive, and the race against time as the Covenant and Flood continue to battle around you makes for a great background. You reach the pickup zone, you hear Echo 419's on her way, and then...
Cortana to Echo 419. 2 Covenant Banshees are approaching on your 6. Evade. Say again, evade. I'm hit. Mayday. Mayday. Airport button is shot to hell. I can't hold her. I can't hold on. Echo 419. She's gone.
It's a somber moment as the last helping hand you had on Halo goes up in a blaze of fire. But the run isn't over. It's one last sprint and several insane jumps to a lone fighter craft in the hangar, and after you dash through the few remaining Flood forces, it's all over. The Chief narrowly avoids the enemies. He jumps on his ship and narrowly escapes the Halo. He looks back to see the ring world be destroyed, as the Pillar of Autumn completely shatters the construct. But despite this victory, we're left on yet another somber note, as Chief and Cortana discover they're the only people to make it out, their victory only coming at a dramatic cost.
Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do for Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. Halo, it's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
I don't think it'll come as a surprise to many of you, but I think it's completely reasonable to say that Halo Combat Evolved offers one of the best campaign experiences in the franchise. It's certainly the most important. Every Halo game to come after this takes lessons learned from Combat Evolved and applies them in their own way. Even the spin-off Halo Wars, I'd argue, owes its roots to Combat Evolved, focusing on the core tenets of infantry and vehicle combat of the FPS game, and drawing inspiration from its predecessor, the original Halo RTS. Even ignoring the legacy CE has left behind, it's a fantastic game as a solo experience. The contained story about a war between humans and aliens leading to greater discoveries, ancient mysteries, and unknowable horrors is one that has definitely stood the test of time. The combat feels fantastic. Every weapon feels like it has a utility purpose in the sandbox rather than all of them being focused on separate speeds of killing aliens. Every human weapon, despite mechanically being familiar to modern weaponry, has a retro sci-fi look applied to them and makes them visually distinct and recognizable as something from Halo. Despite the assault rifle being based on the pulse rifle from the Alien franchise, it has its own style, and all other human weapons follow the rules and codes set by that iconic weapon. Every piece of human technology looking like it belongs in this world. Covenant weaponry also feels distinctly Halo. Weapons such as the plasma rifle definitely being some of the most recognizable silhouettes in all of gaming, and serves a clear purpose in the sandbox. And then there's just fun weapons like the Needler, a gun that fires homing crystals that explode when enough have penetrated a target. And on top of that, there's vehicle combat. Warthogs, Scorpions, Ghosts, and Banshees are all incredibly fun to drive, and yet clearly feel like they fit in their world and serve specific purposes. There are, however, a few teasers in this game that I can imagine left players at the time longing and dreaming for specific items and vehicles. The Covenant Wraith Tank, Fuel Rod Cannon, and that iconic Elite Energy Swords are items that the player cannot use in the base game, and it feels like such a shame. However, I believe that as a whole, Halo CE has one of the greatest weapons and vehicle sandboxes in the franchise. Though definitely being the smallest, every weapon and vehicle has its own place and doesn't tread on the toes of others. There are moments within the campaign that truly feel epic and amazing despite how old the game is. The game does a great job at enrapturing the player, and although storming the beach on the Silent Cartographer simply comes down to killing 3 or 4 squads of Covenant soldiers, the way the game handles these moments makes them truly stand out. The way the Covenant behave also makes no encounter feel the same. The AI used in Halo has often been applauded, and you can see why, as Covenant react to how you approach them, seeking cover when you use ranged weapons, grunts fleeing as you kill their commanding officers, and many other examples that make the Covenant far more interesting than any enemy that just hides behind cover regardless of the situation or charges you blindly. The Covenant, in my opinion, are one of the shining great things about CE, although that does lead into something I'd like to talk about. Despite how prevalent the Covenant are in the game, Halo Combat Evolved as a whole does not feel like a game about them. Out of all of Bungie's Halos, this is the only one I can say where the Covenant feel upstaged. And over the whole franchise of 11 currently released console games, it's one of 3 where the Covenant seem insignificant. It definitely feels weird to say that. Combat Evolved is the game that introduced the Covenant. It set up the core factors about the faction, and yet by the time the Flood appear, the Covenant seems small in comparison. Humanity's war with the Covenant seems small in comparison, and that is because, and I truly believe this is not a game about humanity fighting the Covenant. This is a game about the mystery of the Halo Ring. If this was about humanity's war with the Covenant, then we would have likely have seen 1 or 2 missions exploring more about that faction. Perhaps one showing the Pillar of Autumn retreating from Reach, or more talk about the dangers of the Covenant finding Earth. But that is not the focus. The focus here is on the Halo, the Forerunners, and the Flood. As a major faction throughout the game and the first half's primary antagonist, the Covenant are definitely intriguing, interesting, fun to fight, and wonderfully designed, but they're not the stars of the show. That would be the Flood. From the moment they appeared, these monsters just stole the show. Their introduction, I'd argue, has yet to be topped by any following game. The tone shift and the atmosphere on levels like 343 Guilty Spark are fantastic and work wonders for the Flood's presentation. They're disgusting, writhing monsters that, even when being represented by models from 2001, just look repulsive and creepy, just as Bungie intended. Narratively, they're a strong and menacing presence. Gameplay-wise, however, I'd still argue they're pretty good, but they unfortunately have to share the spotlight with the Covenant, which I'd argue is in this game the more fun faction to fight. Despite this, however, the last few levels really push the Flood and succeeds in setting them up as a threat to all of life. The Forerunners being only represented by the few Sentinels you come across in Guilty Spark is perfectly fine by me. They're a long dead race, and having them show up in force would only take away from the threat of the Flood, and further take away the spotlight from the Covenant. Guilty Spark is at his most insufferable in this game. Although I don't think he's as annoying as a lot of people make him out to be, the way he can just leave you to your fate at sections of the library, and his cryptic speeches don't exactly warm me to him. Speaking of cryptic stuff, a lot is left up to imagination and interpretation in Combat Evolved. The war between the Flood and the Forerunners is hardly explored in any detail. All the player is given is that the Forerunners were a highly advanced race, and even they couldn't beat the nightmare that was the Flood without committing galactic genocide. But the origins of the Flood, who the Forerunners really were, and other such mysteries are left open. Even the Covenant is left open. Although the player is told that they are a religious organization, and it can be inferred the hierarchy and roles each species fills, Combat Evolved does little to explore that, which once again feels particularly strange given how much the faction is explored in pretty much every following installment. It was also stated by Bungie that they had no plans to make Halo 2 or turn this game into a franchise. That only came about after the release of the game and with Microsoft pleading with them to make it so, which means we could have been living in a world where these questions were never explored. Bungie definitely didn't have plans to. The Covenant, the Flood, the Forerunners, both the wars, humanity versus the Covenant and Forerunner versus Flood, all the questions raised would have been given no real answers. It's definitely interesting to think about. What else is there to say about the campaign? The dialogue is great, but does have a few moments where the voice acting feels a little off.
So, what sort of weapon is it?
What are you talking about?
Let's stay focused.
The visuals were great for the time. The combat feels perfect still. The story, while simple, is incredibly effective. Combat Evolved is the perfect setup for a wider universe and is a great mystery story about the wonders of Halo. Each difficulty feels perfectly balanced, as all things should be. That was in the script, I just had to say that. The enemies are interesting and imposing. The characters are memorable and infinitely quotable. The music, it's fantastic. It's really good. Marty O'Donnell is a genius. Halo has a very clear identity, and a part of that identity is the music. Tracks like the main theme, Brothers in Arms, Covenant Dance, On a Pale Horse, Perchance to Dream, I hope it's said like that. They all sound fantastic. It's stuff I listen to constantly. I don't really have much else to say here. I don't know if I can really say anything besides the music's great. All of it is on YouTube, give it a listen. There's songs for pretty much any occasion. Relaxing, shooting aliens, studying, weddings. It works great! Each track fantastically sets the mood for everything in the game. Good job, Marty. As I said, the campaign for Halo CE is truly great, but it really is the main chunk of the game that there is to talk about. Halo Combat Evolved was all about the campaign. As alien as a concept that it may be now, there was no Xbox Live multiplayer in this Halo game. If you wanted to play with friends, you need to go split screen and start up a LAN party. And of course, people did that. A lot of people did that. People would not only play and experience that fantastic campaign together, but they would also take to the multiplayer arena and fight each other. And there were plenty of great maps to accommodate them. No matter the player count, Halo CE had a map for you. Hang 'em High, Damnation, Battle Creek, iconic maps that would see themselves reborn in many installations to come, such as Blood Gulch. The weapons also felt great to use when playing against enemy players. The vehicles, however... yeah, there was something else. A lot of fun to be sure, but you better hope you're a good few meters away from that warthog that's barely moving, otherwise it's gonna rip your soul from your body. Halo CE is really a great experience, for its time and to return to. Ignoring the franchise it sets up, it has a great world, a great setting, and great gameplay to make memories with. While admittedly it's the Halo game I've had the least amount of time playing, the time I have had playing it has been an incredibly fun one. Its story, its campaign, the levels, they're truly something else. I can see why some of my friends still say to this day that this is their favourite Halo game. And it's an important game, not just for me or my friends, not just for Bungie or Microsoft, but for the industry at large. Plenty of mechanics and techniques Halo CE employed would go on to be the foundations for new shooters to follow. CE is not just the granddaddy of Halo, it's the granddaddy of the modern first-person shooter. Despite that subtitle coming around because of Microsoft execs pushing for one, and as goofy as it sounds, Halo really did evolve combat. And that was cheesy as all hell. Thank you all so much for watching through the entirety of this. There's more to come, don't you worry, I'll be going through the rest of the Halo series, except for the mobile games. You cannot make me talk about them, do not even try. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe and click the bell if you want to be notified when we make more content, and if you want to be a part of making more content, we have a Patreon. Thank you so much to Sortu44 for your donation, it means a lot to the team. I'll see you all next time, have a fantastic day, we'll be back with Halo 2 soon enough. See ya.